Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Plan 9 from Outer Space from 1959. When I was getting into movies, the kind of most notorious bad movie was this one. I think it is the first kind of film that had the proclamation of being the worst movie of all time. Everyone says it almost in the same breath as, Citizen Kane is considered the best movie of all time. Plan 9 from Outer Space is considered the worst movie of all time. It's interesting watching it. I had seen it before reviewing this, but it's interesting watching it because I don't necessarily think it is the worst movie of all time, and not to be a counterpoint, just because if it was really the worst movie, you'd sort of have a bad time watching it. And Plan 9 from Outer Space isn't a movie you have a bad time watching. You actually have a fun time watching because you see how ridiculous it is. It's sort of like the best so bad it's good movie, or one of the best. It's probably tied with The Room at this point in most people's minds. And I think that kind of brings up like what the people that love to watch bad movies is all about, and why this kind of culture it was always around but got kind of codified, I guess, with Plan 9. I think it's because you can't believe he thought he could do this. You can't believe the sets, how ridiculous it is, from the plane cockpit to the cutting from various shots that don't match at all. There's one sequence that kept going through so many different things. I thought it was doing like a smarter film thing, but I don't think it was. But it gives you kind of this weird kind of arty sense to it, where you're cutting from day to night to set to location to Bela Lugosi footage to like Vampira to Tor Johnson to all these things, and you're like, what collage of nonsense am I in right now? And it's like beautiful. It's like actually wonderful filmmaking because you're compelled by it. That's the thing about this movie. Like I think like films like Battlefield Earth are worse because at the end I feel sad and depressed because I watched this thing, and then when I watch Plan 9 from Outer Space, I'm always like, oh, that was fun, and now I'm going to watch the Riff Tracks thing, and I'm going to have fun with that too. That's sort of like why this film a little bit started the whole kind of, or is considered, maybe not really, to have started the whole so bad it's good movies, or that whole thing. I mean, the whole idea of this film, of being aliens who want to warn Earth from before they make this mega weapon. So the way they do it is to raise the dead, but only like 3 people who all look really cool, which is, good, a good optics wise, I think good. And then they come out from the grave, sort of attack people, and this is their 9th plan to kind of warn humans that they are sort of going too far, of making this weapon that will destroy, sun particles, which will cause a chain reaction, which will go all the way up to the sun and destroy the sun and like destroy the universe and stuff. This film is kind of a interesting sort of postmodern hodgepodge that you would sort of seen later on, because a lot of this film in some ways, and this isn't trying to be insulting in any way actually, a lot of it reminds me of like what we later see in Independence Day. You have various different characters, various different locations, experiencing this one event, which is UFOs coming to Earth. Now, the difference between Independence Day and Plan 9 is Plan 9 didn't just stop with the aliens, they had zombies in it too, which, kudos to Plan 9, because that makes this film so much more interesting. I actually think a worse movie is like a movie that would just be aliens. Like that movie, that sounds like it sucks, but when you put zombies and aliens, I mean, who's going to say no to that? You see echoes of Independence Day, but you also see the idea of the postmodernism that you would see in when you got the late 70s Hollywood beginning of the blockbuster, when you have things like Star Wars and Jaws, and things would combine, various ideas to something new. And he's both combining like the atomic age of horror, but he also has, this is the final screen appearance of Bela Lugosi as Vampire, as Tor Johnson, playing zombies, and that feels like, the 30s, while at the same time he's looking forward as well and combining it to make something entirely new. And I think that's sort of what makes this film so iconic, because it's sort of like Ed Wood, I think sort of in a bizarre way, sort of knew like what was gonna sell, even though he didn't, maybe made it in a way that is less hospitable to most people. He sort of was a little more onto something that we want to agree with, because at that time, you couldn't really make this in a Hollywood system. If you wanted to make a horror film or a sci-fi film, those are mostly pretty low budget, and you couldn't do all the things that he wanted to do. If you presented this script to like a studio now, I mean, they'd actually give it $100 million, and like it would star The Rock and like Gal Gadot and then like, I don't know, who's a horror icon, Robert Englund maybe. I could totally see that happening. I totally think you could do that, like literally pretty much do the same plot and people would have fun with it. And that shows you, I think the seriousness of film has definitely changed from this, but it's also that it's just so bizarre, like the whole story behind it. And we've seen Ed Wood, the Tim Burton film, since then. And I think a lot of this has to do with, this film, and I think The Room is this way as well, is it wasn't really chosen the worst film of all time by like critics, much like Citizen Kane was chosen by Sight and Sound. And everyone hears the story that the Golden Turkey Awards, which is this famous book by the Medveds, who are kind of the ones who kind of came up, or the scholarly idea, I guess, that they kind of define bad movies. They actually didn't, which I found interesting. They wrote a book called The 50 Worst Movies of All Time, and they didn't include Plan 9. They got so many letters about it. In their next book, the Golden Turkey Awards, they made it Worst Picture of All Time, and Ed Wood the Worst Director of All Time. And those stuck. Many of the awards they gave out for other things nobody really remembers and are not things that people quote in pop culture just like at the ready, but those two things stuck. And it's almost like we're giving sort of them credit for it, but that was in the ether. And it's always been said that Ed Wood didn't get to have the kind of post this is the worst movie of all time career like Tommy Wiseau did with The Room. But when you look at what happened with that, and since Ed Wood died in like 78, just means I'm very curious what he thought of Star Wars. And this played on TV a lot at like midnight movie kind of things. I wonder if he was aware, it was suddenly in the air that enough people would write into these guys and say like, why didn't you include Plan 9, that most people already considered it a worst movie of all time. So it's sort of interesting, the whole idea of this, because it was one, I think the worst movie of all time is pretty much decided by the people, whereas the best movie, I mean, I don't know who decides that. That's a whole other thing. But that's really interesting to me because that changes a lot, I think. It changes the whole idea of what the worst movie of all time and what it means. But I think, there's no way you can come out of this and not remember like a certain line, a certain shot, a certain thing like that. Remembering like Vampires has such a interesting look about her. The Bela Lugosi footage is obviously iconic. Tor Johnson having trouble getting out from the thing. You're just so stupid, that kind of stuff. The predictions of Criswell, all these things is just like, it adds up to so much. But I also think one of the things that changed perception is, one, the movie Ed Wood made us not just view it as like, this guy's a stupid moron who made a dumb movie. And when I watch like the Angry Video Games review of this and other reviews online, I think the difference is no one had as much access as independent filmmakers do now, or people on YouTube and all these things. And it's completely changed the idea of this, because more people are like, he did what he could do at the time. And there's so many times as us as people make YouTube videos or all those things, like go like, what do we have to sort of make this work? And when Plan 9 came out and most people's access to these things were fairly limited, and they're only seeing things that are like professionally made by a studio or a television station or something like that, they look at this and go, oh, look how crappy it is. But now it's more affectionate. Even The Room, like, we view it as art, and I think we should, honestly. I think it's almost like accidental art. It's like, it is like a horror movie, like, oh no, I dropped a bunch of potions in a lab, what do I do? Like, what the fuck is this? This is horrific. Like, well, I don't know, should we shoot it? Maybe let's let it exist. It's sort of interesting. And that's like what this is, but this is the most extreme case, because you're kind of like, you're watching him cut stock footage, just footage that shouldn't be in this movie, I don't even know how you go about like planning something this purposefully ridiculous. Like, it's an absolute cult movie, because it's like almost the perfect B movie, because a perfect B movie is one you can drink with your friends and laugh at, watch and not take very seriously, have a good Riff Tracks or Mystery Science Theater episode about it, and it's not really disrespectful, because like, how can you be disrespectful at this being the worst movie? Because it's just like, it definitely is. It's just such a great example. Maybe I do think maybe Manos is way, worse, but even that's fun. Like, the whole idea of the bad movie is put into question when you're watching this, because this is under 80 minutes. It's not very long. It doesn't feel painful to watch. You kind of like the iconography. It's got a definite style about it, and it's been so referenced in culture and so forth. Like, for a movie that's supposed to be not good, it's influenced so much, and in a way I think its goodness is related to just, what the fuck is this? It's kind of cool in that you're like, it does feel like they accidentally made a strange cult movie, when that wasn't cool, but they probably made one of the more notorious ones. It's a high watermark for shit, but it's like really good shit. Every time I watch it, I really enjoy it. I think I enjoyed it even more this time because I looked at like how many different parts were into the editing. I mean, is it Eisenstein? Is it MTV editing? I don't know what it is, but it just looks like an absolute mess. But it's like an absolute mess you kind of like, you can't help but watch. It's sort of like a bad car wreck, but not as morbid as a lot of bad movies. A lot of them you're like, oh, what were they thinking? They're so stupid. It's like all these things. And this, you're like, I don't know. There's like some genius at play. I think he was sort of onto something here. Some of these lines are like so strange, and like they keep doing the worst ideas ever. Like they just the character motivations or how they say, like one time he doesn't say the yard lights, he literally says the urine lights. The urine lights? What are urine lights? Is that a thing? Don't Google it. There's so many things like that in this movie. There's almost too many things. Like that's kind of what makes it inviting. It's like a good movie. Because there is too many things in there to enjoy. It's just like, I think I understand why there's a cult around it, because it's so much fun to watch and research and read about and hear about what happened with Bela Lugosi, and then watch the Tim Burton movie, and then keep seeing documentaries and keep hearing about these people and hearing about like how they made this film that was, absolutely this guy's vision, and it came out to be one of the most notorious films of all time. I've seen a lot of these drive-in films. I've seen a lot of the B-50 stuff, and none of them are really almost as enjoyable as this. Like, this is a lot of fun. And I think that's like, I think that's the appeal to Plan 9, is you almost feel like it's like a hidden treasure that like people won't get why this is so fun to watch. People won't get that. They'll just look at it and go, this is bad. This is a bad movie. It's stupid. Just disregard it. But that almost makes it more fun. Like, you're not supposed to like this, but you're having so much fun with it. Why not keep going with it? It's sort of like fast food or something like that. It's sort of like a guilty pleasure, but you shouldn't feel guilty. And I think that's the fun with this movie. It's just like, this isn't like a normal kind of viewing experience where like I watched a story and the story was good. This is like, I watched a thing and I want to decipher it because why did I have such a good time with it? And that's what makes this film so inviting, and probably also The Room as well. Who cares what is the worst movie of all time? But I think what Plan 9 has going for it is much like the idea of Ed Wood, which they would later sort of just directly do with Disaster Artist, of like a dreamer who wants his vision and wants to make his film despite not having the access. And with Plan 9, I think that's so in there because you had this dreamer who tried and tried his whole life and he never really got there, and it's like almost too hard to read that, especially if you're someone who makes your own stuff, like hear about his biography. But it gives you hope in that he made something that we're still talking about today, that he got to do his complete vision. It was the film he was the most proudest of. It's an utterly ridiculous thing, and we will forever be talking about it. And that kind of gives you hope as an artist, as an independent filmmaker, that it might not be that people take you seriously or you're a great artist. What you did sort of lives on. I think that's something that will always be attached to this, and something that gives this film a lot more heart. And maybe the context it was just watching it at midnight, on a Saturday in the 60s or something. But it's what makes this film fun, because you see a filmmaker and a group of actors really liking what they're doing and making maybe one of the most fun B movies of all time. And I think the overall experience is I just had a good time watching Plan 9 from Outer Space. Sure, maybe it is the worst movie of all time, but I think that's a pretty cool notoriety for this movie. So if you have seen Plan 9 from Outer Space and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.